Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, Burundi's new president is sworn in. Some had hoped Évariste Ndayishimiye would be more open towards the international community than his predecessor, the late Pierre Nkurunziza, who died last week. Instead, he's vowed to toe the same line. Also, Kenya beats Djibouti to be elected to the UN Security Council. It won out in a General Assembly vote on Thursday. And Kenya's coronavirus restrictions see the number of tourists visiting the country's beauty spots slow to a trickle. The collapse of the tourism sector is hitting communities living around the Maasai Mara region hard. But first, Burundi's new president was sworn in on Thursday after his inauguration was fast-tracked following the sudden death of the outgoing leader last week. Évariste Ndayishimiye had been due to take office in August. He's now vowed to continue on in the path of his controversial predecessor, the late Pierre Nkurunziza. Nicolas Chemin has more.
Cannons were fired for the swearing-in ceremony of Burundi's new president, Évariste Ndayishimiye. To enter the stadium, you had to wash your hands, but inside few had masks and there was no social distancing. This event should have taken place in August, but was brought forward after the sudden death last week of his predecessor, Pierre Nkurunziza. After a tense and bloody political crisis in recent years, many Burundians had hoped Ndayishimiye would seek reconciliation with those who criticized the regime. Instead, General Ndayishimiye praised Nkurunziza, who was a staunch evangelist, and criticized those who had fled the country because they feared the authorities. Some in the civil society expressed their disappointment.
Il n'y a pas de place pour l'opposition. On ressent un manque de rupture. C'est une continuité, mais beaucoup plus belliciste, avec un homme qui sera moins religieux, moins flou, et beaucoup plus clair sur le fait qu'il veut s'attaquer à toute forme de contradiction, à tout débat.
But Évariste Ndayishimiye was the first high official to recognize that the coronavirus has reached Burundi. Nkurunziza used to say God had protected his country from the virus, but many Burundians think he might have died precisely because of COVID-19. A medical source told AFP he had suffered respiratory distress just before dying.
Kenya's been elected to the UN Security Council for 2021 to 2022. It won out in a General Assembly vote on Thursday and is due to replace South Africa. Mukelia Shachwayo has more from Nairobi.
Kenya has won the contested seat in the United Nations Security Council following a second round of voting. It was competing against Djibouti. Neither of the countries were able to get the two-thirds majority when the member states voted on Wednesday. Now, the UN Security Council is made up of 5 permanent member states and 10 non-permanent member states that are chosen from various regions. This time, Africa was entitled 1 seat in this vote. What usually happens is that the African Union puts forth one candidate, or rather endorses one candidate who proceeds uncontested. However, this time, Djibouti decided to contest, even though the African Union had initially endorsed Kenya. Kenya won. This is the first time 2 African countries have competed against each other when one country had been endorsed by the African Union. Now, experts are concerned that this race and its outcome may strain the diplomatic relations in the Horn and east of Africa.
Well, South Africa's president has said that parts of the country's leisure industry, including restaurants, hotels and hairdressers, may be next to get the green light to reopen, despite coronavirus cases in the country continuing to rise. The number of confirmed cases have gone up by over 37% over the past week. Despite the health risks, President Cyril Ramaphosa said that people's livelihoods have to be protected. The country's taken a huge economic hit from the coronavirus lockdown, which was originally brought in at the end of March. The country's unemployment figures are expected to balloon. On Thursday, public broadcaster SABC said that it would be laying off 600 employees, nearly a fifth of its staff. And African migrants in Moscow are being caught up in the instability caused by Russia's race to tackle the spread of coronavirus. Lockdown in the capital was lifted on the 9th because of the economic cost of the restrictions. Thousands are now out of a job, and informal workers are the most vulnerable. Many Africans are amongst those affected. Our correspondents report.
It's 7:30 a.m. and Stefan is going back to work. A Cameroonian in Moscow without papers, he had lost his job in March when the lockdown started.
Since I have no papers, the company could not provide me with documents to go to work. I'm lucky they called me to come back to work today. Other people like me have still got no work.
The restaurant where Stefan does all sorts of jobs for €1.30 an hour has just reopened. But the pandemic has forced many other SMEs in Moscow to close for good. Without this humanitarian aid from an NGO, Cecile, who has a 4-year-old daughter, would struggle to make ends meet.
When the coronavirus started, we weren't prepared. I hadn't stocked up on anything. I was taken by surprise.
Cecile owes 2 months' rent on this one-bedroom flat she and her daughter share with 3 others. She's also got no papers and didn't get her old job back.
I called them up and they said no, for the moment we don't want black people. We don't want Africans. It's really not easy for us Africans to find work here, even just handing out leaflets or restaurant jobs.
The NGO that is helping the refugees says the pandemic has made their situation worse.
Основная, конечно, проблема – это то, что большинство беженцев в России, так как они не имеют легального статуса из-за политики России в отношении беженцев, у них нет трудовых договоров. И как только начался карантин, это были именно те люди, которые просто первые потеряли работу.
There are no statistics on just how many Africans are in Moscow having fled war or persecution, but in Russia's spiralling economic crisis, they are now among the most vulnerable.
Kenya's coronavirus restrictions have seen the number of tourists visiting the country's beauty spots slow to a trickle, if that. The collapse of the tourism sector is hitting rural communities living around the Maasai Mara region particularly hard. Elodie Cousin and Bastien Renouy report.
This is the first time the Maasai Mara National Wildlife Reserve has had no visitors since it opened in 1961. Prince grew up nearby. He came to the park every day since he was a child. He never imagined it would be empty of tourists.
This time, other years, the past years, is always a very busy time when the migration is onset. The wild beasts are crossing, they are behind those hills over there, coming from the Serengeti. And usually this time there's thousands of cars, thousands of tourists.
Tourism employs most of the people who live around the park. Kenya closes borders in March to prevent the spread of the coronavirus. No foreign tourists have come here since. Souvenir sellers, hotel staff and guides are waiting for the visitors and their livelihoods to come back.
We don't have full staff at the moment due of the corona. We don't have tourism, so we don't have enough money to pay them. So we just have few of them. There are 4 of them that take care of the facility.
In nearby villages, people are struggling to get by. Dennis is collecting donations from tourists who used to visit regularly. He buys flour, which he hands out to locals once a week.
One bundles got 24 kgs, and we got 32 of them.
Hundreds of families rely on his help. Government support has been scarce.
They brought us food only once during the second week after the borders were closed. But since, the only distributions that we've had are those organized by the community.
Next month, Kenya's president is expected to announce whether the borders will reopen. Until they do and the tourists return, the community around the Maasai Mara will struggle to fend for themselves.
Well, France 24 journalists Catherine Norris-Trent, Julie Dungelhoff and Abdullah Malkawi have won the One World Media Award for refugee reporting with their documentary, Libya, the Infernal Trap. It tells the story of people making the dangerous journey through Libya to try and make it to Europe. We strongly recommend you catch it if you can. You can watch that on France 24's website. That is, though, what we're going to have to leave it now for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us. Do so again if you can. Take care.